Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room. Now, as our loyal listeners will recall, in the run-up to the 2018 election, I issued an open invitation for any candidates or for those who had already served in national elected or appointed positions to be guests in the ladies' room. And several people accepted. We've had a cabinet secretary, a former ambassador, one senatorial candidate, and today we have our fourth United States congressional candidate, Cathy Kunkel, who is running as a Democrat in West Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Now, unlike most congressional candidates, Cathy is an energy policy expert. How cool is that? Wouldn't it be nice to have experts in Congress in various topics that are critically important for us, other than just somebody who happens to be a lawyer? She's defended West Virginians against monopoly electric utilities, analyzed the economic and financial impact of our natural gas drilling and pipelines in the region, researched absentee land ownership in West Virginia, and fought electric utility corporate bailouts. She's the co-founder of Advocates for a Safe Water System in the aftermath of the January 2014 Freedom Industries chemical spill, and she also co-founded Rise Up West Virginia, or Rise Up WV, an organization that advocates for healthcare for all, quality public education, better services for those suffering from addiction, and many other issues we've already discussed on this podcast. Her research has been cited by the Washington Post, NBC News, and several other media outlets, as well as by members of Congress. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Princeton University, my proud alma mater, go Tigers. She received a scholarship to study physics and advanced mathematics at Cambridge University, where she received a master's degree, and then she began a PhD program in energy policy at UC Berkeley. That's where the story gets interesting, and I'll let her tell the rest of the story. Cathy Kunkel, welcome to the ladies' room.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. We love it when women run for Congress, and we love it when they come talk about why in the ladies' room. And one of the things that really struck me about your candidacy is that you are very passionate about healthcare. So how'd that happen?
I mean, I think it was basically born out of my experiences living and organizing in West Virginia, where I've been living here for the last decade. You kind of took my story up until the right about when I moved to West Virginia, when I decided that I was not interested in being an academic, and I wanted to be working more in service to communities. And I ended up getting what was supposed to be a short-term job in West Virginia, turned into living in West Virginia for the last 10 years. So
the story I read is that it was an internship, kind of.
Yes, it was.
I love it when internships turn into lifetime passions. And we've had many, many guests on our show who've told those kind of stories about how they were really influenced by these internships. So that randomly took you to West Virginia, or took you to West Virginia by design?
No, pretty randomly. I mean, it was an internship for supposed to be 4 to 6 months, looking at the feasibility of a community wind project that was proposed in West Virginia. And I'd never spent any significant amount of time in West Virginia before, even though I grew up in Maryland, just right next door. And I just really loved West Virginia. And, I only had that job for, a relatively short amount of time, but I just kept finding things to do here. And, there's just, there's such a huge need here, whether it's, working on electrical system issues and working as a consumer advocate on energy system issues, or organizing after the chemical spill that you mentioned. So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of exploitation of West Virginia. So it really opened my eyes in a lot of ways moving to West Virginia, and healthcare was certainly one of them. When we co-founded Rise Up West Virginia after the 2016 election to try to build more progressive political leadership in Charleston and the surrounding area here, one of the first issues that we decided to work on was healthcare. And we did a listening project where we went door to door and talked to folks about their experiences with the healthcare system. And across, just universally, regardless of who people had voted for in the 2016 election, everyone agreed that the healthcare system was broken. Everyone had, themselves or someone in their family who had had a serious issue affording medication or otherwise trying to get the healthcare that they needed.
And that was before the pandemic.
Yes, this was 2017. This was well before we had
right now
idea
people are arguing whether we're in the second wave of the pandemic or the third wave. I would argue we're still in the first wave. But how is the pandemic treating you? How has your life been affected by this?
Well, I mean, I've been, relatively lucky in the sense of, being able to, isolate and follow social distancing guidelines and having a roof over my head and food on the table, which is, more than a lot of folks can say around this country, unfortunately. Of course, it's caused a huge shift in our campaign strategy, being unable to just, go to all of the events and fairs and festivals that we otherwise would have gone to. We really shifted our campaign to writing postcards to voters. Our volunteers have sent close to 80,000 postcards to voters across the district. Yeah.
How many people are in your district?
I mean, total population of the district is probably like 600,000, but people who vote is about 250,000.
Yeah, I don't know, obviously our listeners are from all across the country, and we're in 43 countries now. So I just want you to explain a little bit about West Virginia itself, starting with the population of West Virginia.
Right. So the population of West Virginia is about 1.8 million. So we're a very rural state. We're one of the less populated states in the country. And we have three members of the House of Representatives currently. So 3 congressional districts. And I'm running in the 2nd congressional district, which roughly cuts sort of the middle third of the state. It includes Charleston, which is the capital city of West Virginia, where I live. It includes the far eastern tip of West Virginia, which is a increasingly suburbanized area that is pretty close to Washington, D.C., and a lot of people commute to that area or commute to D.C. from that area. And then we have basically 15 rural counties in between. So it's a very geographically and economically diverse district.
So I do have to also tell people that even though you have one woman Congresswoman currently, one of your 3 representatives is currently a woman, there's only been 3 women Congresswomen from West Virginia in history. So if elected, you would be only the 4th woman congressional representative. I also have to tell you that a few years ago, I lived in a district where my congressman, Rush Holt Jr., was also a physicist, and we actually had bumper stickers that said, yes, my congressman is a rocket scientist, but he has a connection to West Virginia. His father was a senator from West Virginia, and less well known, his mother was the first woman ever to be made Secretary of State in West Virginia. So I thought that was kind of a cool connection that I have to West Virginia, 6 degrees of separation.
That is neat. And in fact, Rush Holt was actually also my congressman when I was at Princeton. So.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, right. I remember those my congressman is a rocket scientist bumper stickers.
Yes, and he was one of 2 physicists at the time. But of course, we do our homework here in the ladies' room. And I did read an interview, an article in one of the Princeton newspapers that was done about a year after you graduated, and it was talking about you and your background and winning this Churchill scholarship to study at Cambridge. And I loved a comment that you made that said that you went to college because you wanted to be able to have a career in environmental sciences and have a positive impact on the environment, and you wanted to get the education to enable you to do that. And that's very cool. And when we think of healthcare, of course, we think of, at the most basic level, the most integrally important issues for our health are clean air, clean water. Even now with the pandemic, we're telling everybody to wash hands. And one of the facts that I learned that I keep ranting and raving about is in our indigenous populations across the country, COVID has been devastating. The numbers have been, higher than in any other population. And yet in some Native American populations, up to 30% of homes don't have running water. And here we keep telling everybody, one of the most important techniques to prevent this is frequent hand washing. So obviously water is important. But when most of us think about West Virginia, we also think about coal. So I want you to connect the dots for us between what's happened in the coal industry in West Virginia. We heard a lot about bringing back clean coal jobs in the last election, which those of us from New Jersey have a hard time understanding. But talk about how that has really had an impact on healthcare in the people of West Virginia.
Right. Well, first of all, I would just add that the coal industry has been collapsing in West Virginia for the last decade. Natural gas and renewable energy have taken up an increasing share of our nation's power supply. And so coal has been steadily declining. And so that's actually one of the reasons that I was inspired to run, or perhaps frustrated enough to run is a better word, that, for the last decade, all we've got and have been these empty political promises about bringing back the coal industry. And it's not happening. It's economically, it's not going to happen. And, for reasons of climate change and otherwise, it can't happen. And we need to figure out how we're going to build a more diverse economy here, and build the infrastructure we need for safe drinking water and broadband internet, to create a foundation for people to be able to move here and for other types of businesses and industries to grow. On the healthcare side of things, one of the most obvious but most, I think, perhaps overlooked in the rest of the country impact of the coal industry is black lung disease, which is still around, and in fact on the rise. There's been studies of instances of black lung disease growing amongst younger coal miners, which I think is in part a function of the coal becoming more difficult to mine and having to cut through more rock to get the coal, and that rock dust hurting miners' lungs. And one of the things that people often do not talk about in this debate over the Affordable Care Act is that the Affordable Care Act included provisions, amendments from Senator Byrd of West Virginia, that made it easier, streamline the process for applying for black lung benefits, which is still a very onerous process. And I've spoken with families who have spent months or even years fighting with coal industry lawyers to try to get the benefits that they've earned from their decades in the mines.
Just to connect the dots for people, because this is a direct occupational exposure. There is no other way that I know that you get black lung disease other than inhaling coal dust.
Exactly. And yet you still have to fight every time with the coal industry about whether your lung impairment is actually due to inhaling coal dust, or if it's because you're a smoker or some other reason. So it's always one of those David and Goliath battles where a coal miner is up against a very well-funded industry opposition. Even if all of the facts are on the miner's side, it's still difficult to prevail.
And the other thing I want to underscore for people is that, contrary to what the current occupant of the White House has said on numerous occasions, those coal jobs did not disappear because the economy was not doing well, but they disappeared because of a natural evolution in technology. Not a natural evolution, a gain in technology, and as you said, moving to different forms of energy that are renewable sources of energy. Is that correct?
Right. That's absolutely correct. And yeah, no, that's totally correct. And mechanization of coal mining is something that no one talks about. But coal mining employment in West Virginia peaked, I think, in the 50s. And as the industry became more and more mechanized, even when it was a huge share of power generation, the jobs were still falling because the industry was getting more and more mechanized. And now with more and more natural gas and renewable energy on the grid, it's even more difficult for the coal industry.
So when I asked you to make the connection between the loss of these coal jobs and healthcare, I wasn't thinking of black lung disease. So thank you for bringing that up. What I was thinking about is just the very basic element that we're seeing all across the country, particularly during the pandemic, is that when people lose their jobs, if they have employer paid healthcare or health insurance, they ultimately lose their health insurance. So one of the things I'm very concerned about is we didn't really connect those dots when we were talking about the Affordable Care Act initially. And I think a lot of people had complacency and felt like their jobs were secure. And then this happened. So talk to us a little bit about that and how Medicaid expansion fits into all of that.
Right. So, I mean, the Affordable Care Act certainly brought real benefits in terms of healthcare coverage to a lot of West Virginians. The Affordable Care Act gave states the ability to expand Medicaid, and in West Virginia, that expansion has provided for health insurance for more than 140,000 people in the state.
What does that mean, giving states the ability to expand Medicaid? What does that mean on a just very nuts and bolts level?
I mean, it just means more people in the state are eligible to be Medicaid, to be served by Medicaid, but not all states have chosen to do this.
And
so
why is that?
I mean, I think it's a political decision. I don't totally, I mean, to be honest, I don't understand why a state would opt not to grant healthcare to more of its citizens.
And that would be my answer too. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I was trying to lead you down a garden path. I think that's when I read about this as a physician, I don't see any downside to a state accepting to expand Medicaid. And it seemed to me that the states who didn't, were basically cutting their nose to spite their faces for very political, tribal reasons. Is that our party is for this, your party is against this, and therefore we're not doing this. And the people who suffer are the people who need it.
Exactly. And West Virginia, fortunately, did choose to expand Medicaid, and that has, directly benefited, as I said, more than 140,000 people across our state. And you were talking about the pandemic, and I read a study recently that estimated that more than 60,000 West Virginians lost employer-based health insurance as a result of losing their jobs during a pandemic. And I don't know where you stand on the issue, but our campaign has been a big proponent of a universal healthcare system, a Medicare for all type of system, if you will, in part because of the real challenges that come with employer-based health insurance, not just during a pandemic, but the burden that it puts on business owners, small business owners who want to do the right thing, want to offer healthcare to their employees and just cannot afford to do so, or larger businesses that are required to offer it and then have difficulty competing against foreign firms where the burden is not on the employer to pay for health insurance. I talked to a furniture manufacturer in our district who said that in his industry, the health insurance, the payroll cost of that is the largest cost, or one of the largest causes of offshoring jobs in his industry.
Well, and we hear lots of car manufacturers who say that the greatest expense that goes into the cost of every single car that's made in the United States is healthcare. So and you said you don't know where I stand on this issue. So clearly you're not a regular listener of our podcast.
I'm not.
But I am absolutely, I fall into the camp so far of Medicare for all who need it. I recognize that there are people who are steadily, gainfully employed, who are relatively happy with the health insurance that their employers provide, and they may not need Medicare. But I also understand that this is scary for a lot of people because, first of all, it's a human instinct. We don't generally like change. But two, I think there's tremendous confusion between Medicaid and Medicare. Because first of all, the words sound kind of similar. So you want to give people just the top line view about the difference between Medicaid and Medicare.
Right. I mean, Medicare is the health insurance program that you're automatically eligible for anyone over age 65. And, that's, it's a government health insurance program. And Medicaid is the income-based health insurance program where, if your income is below a certain level, you qualify for Medicaid. So that's the that's the very basic, simplistic explanation of the difference.
Absolutely. And so studies of users of Medicare are overwhelmingly enthusiastic that they're very happy with it. And my personal healthcare reform plan back in 2007, when Congress was talking about this, was just to get a couple of accountants in a room and do some number crunching and just figure out how much people under 65 would have to pay based on their age and their income if they wanted to purchase Medicare. Because people need to understand Medicare is not free.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
So if I wanted to purchase Medicare, and if anybody important is listening, I really do want to purchase Medicare for myself because I'm in that trap space personally. And you don't think about physicians themselves being in a health insurance trap. How's that? But I'm 59 years old and lost my health insurance 8 years ago when I got divorced, and I'm self-employed. So, and go figure, the American Medical Association doesn't offer a healthcare plan for its members. So there's no other way I can get insurance other than buying the one plan that's available for me in the state of New Jersey, which is not super great, but it is super expensive.
I mean, that's kind of the situation I was in as a self-employed person, prior to running this campaign. And there were only 2 companies that were offering health insurance plans on the exchange here in West Virginia. And, they were pretty expensive and not great plans. But
well, we have only one that I
are.
qualify for as a person of my age. I actually thought about running for Congress in 2016, and my whole platform was going to be doctor runs for Congress to afford health insurance for her own family. And then I lied down until the feeling went away.
I mean, it is outrageous, though, that members of Congress have such great health insurance, and yet it's not a priority to guarantee that to their constituents
for life.
Yeah,
guaranteed after, even after my understanding is even if after serving 1 term. So that's a pretty good perk that most people don't have. Now, most people are listening to this podcast and not watching on video, so they can't see your campaign poster behind you. I love your slogan, for the many, not the few. But I also love the fact that you have this light bulb, as the graphic. So tell us, what was the light bulb moment that made you decide, okay, this is it, I'm actually running for Congress?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was a evolving process, and it really wasn't something that I had ever anticipated doing. When I was in college or whatever, I never was one of those people who said someday I'm going to be in Congress. that was not me. And I was actually approached by other people to run, and was initially kind of like, no, that sounds totally insane. Like, why would I do that?
Why would I want to do that?
Yeah. But it turns out that I like insane ideas also. So I kept thinking about it. And, it was a combination of factors that finally pushed me to do it. One was, as I said, just my growing frustration with West Virginia politics and the kind of, status quo of continuing to bury our heads in the sand about the coal industry coming back here. And, there's just been this growing national chorus of voices demanding action on climate change, which is obviously a crisis that we need to address. And, quite frankly, if West Virginia's congressional leadership doesn't get into that conversation in a serious way to say, yes, this is a problem, and we have powered this country for a really long time, and like we need reinvestment in our communities to help transition our economy. If we don't do that, we're just going to get left behind, yet again. And so that was one factor. And then another factor was just locally, there's been a really interesting political moment going on in West Virginia this election cycle. We have a whole coalition of candidates, including myself, who are running under this banner called West Virginia Can't Wait. And it's essentially a pledge to not take any corporate money in our campaigns, which is really important, especially in a state that's been dominated by the coal and gas industries for such a long time. But as you know, nationally, the health insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, all throw their money and their weight around in politics in a way that has been quite detrimental to getting real reform through on the healthcare issue. So I'm very proud to be part of that coalition, and I think it's exciting because it's helping to kind of change the narrative here in West Virginia too, to have dozens of candidates who are running on that same pledge.
I think it's a very clever concept. I did read about it a little bit, and my understanding is one of the other terms of being one of these we can't wait candidates is that you agree that you share certain values and you share certain positions that are consistent with those values. I don't remember the categories. So
yeah, being pro-labor is certainly one of them. Part of the pledge is never to cross a picket line. Part of the pledge is to never punch down, if you will, to never sort of blame people who are suffering for their problems, but to really try to look at things in a systemic way and say, why is all the wealth flowing to the top here in West Virginia and around the country, and how could we build power together to really lift all boats. So those are kind of I think the fundamental philosophical tenets beyond just not taking corporate money.
And I think that goes along with your slogan about for the many, not the few.
Exactly.
I think that, this concept, one of the things that appealed to me about reading about this We Can't Wait platform is I think as, just as a lay person, one of the things I've been very frustrated with in our political system is we have gotten away from this concept that we have shared values in our society. And those shared values can be very basic, almost to the point where I think that's why we got away from them, because they were so obvious. But we forgot that clean water is a shared value. And certainly what happened in Flint, Michigan, hit us in the face with how important this was. But there have been studies done in cities around the country in public schools where they don't have lead-free water in a very high percentage. And certainly in New Jersey, we have two cities, Trenton and Camden, where this is a problem. But this is a problem all over. Clean air. Certainly we're seeing people in California who routinely have to consult an app about whether it's safe to go outside because of air pollution. Now, obviously that's from wildfires, which is also really terrible for our environment. So maybe saying we value the safety of our planet, or we value our country not burning down, is kind of another really important shared value. And all of this, of course, is integrally important to our healthcare, at a very basic level. If you can't breathe, if you can't drink water, you can't live.
Yeah, and there are some real drinking water horror stories in West Virginia too. You brought up Flint. We had the chemical spill in Charleston back in 2014 that contaminated the drinking water here for a couple of months. And there are communities, particularly in the coal fields, that haven't had safe drinking water for years. And there are some real cancer clusters and other really, really horrible consequences of that.
Yeah, and we like to think of ourselves as, this very highly developed, advanced country. But, as a citizen of that country, I'm a little embarrassed that we can't provide, or we haven't made it a priority to provide these basic assurances. And of course, all of those concerns carry over into how the pandemic has been handled. Because that is that's a natural disaster of epic proportions. It's affecting every single person in this country, whether they know it or not. whether they believe it or accept it or not. And we have to move forward from that. Do you have any thoughts on the pandemic and, if you were on the COVID task force, what you'd like to see happen differently, aside from a radiologist
Well, I mean, I
being in
think,
charge?
I think, I'm not a medical expert. I would love to see more medical experts in that.
Wouldn't that be novel?
But, I think the pandemic also reflects like a longstanding underinvestment in public health infrastructure in our country. And so, as a member of Congress, as someone who's looking at budgets, and that is where I would really like to see correcting that flaw and really investing in public health, because it's one of those things, like I think like environmental protection, that you don't really miss it until it's gone, and then you're like, oh, oops, I guess that would have been a good thing to have. But I think over the long term, obviously we need to build up the CDC and the funding of local health departments. And in the short term, I mean, I still don't understand why we've been doing such a poor job of contact tracing. And we also just need more economic relief, relief for families that are struggling with evictions and utility bills, shutoffs, and all of these issues since the federal assistance expired at the end of July, and resources for schools. I mean, I was looking at how much money the CARES Act gave to West Virginia schools to try to adapt to this pandemic, and it is like, a couple percent of the overall budget for the annual budget for education. And that's just not enough when you think about how much investment should have been made and hiring additional staff too, to be able to cover online teaching as well as classroom teaching in this sort of hybrid model. And instead, we're just kind of running our teachers into the ground here.
As well as to cover for teachers who are sick or teachers who have childcare needs.
Absolutely.
So, the irony is we're expecting teachers to go to school and teach in districts, and their own children maybe in other districts and not having school. And they're expected to homeschool their own children at the same time as they're going to school to educate other people's children. So I'm very glad my kids are out of school. But that's certainly, a very integral issue. Anyway, so if I was the next president of the United States, what would you want to tell me right now about your top 3 priorities for your first term in Congress?
Well, I think my top priority is probably a big enough one. But I think addressing the climate crisis in a way that we don't leave parts of our country like West Virginia behind, that have dealt with the fossil fuel economy for such a long time, that have powered this country and yet perpetually been among the poorest states in the country. So making sure that we're addressing climate change in a way that brings investment in safe drinking water infrastructure, environmental reclamation, internet infrastructure to places like West Virginia, so that we can build a thriving economy here. That's got to be number one. And on the healthcare issue, as I said before, I'm an advocate of single payer health insurance, but whatever we can do to protect the gains that have been made in the ACA and expand affordable healthcare to more people, we need to move on that.
Great. And how can we get you elected, aside from sending this podcast to everybody we know in West Virginia?
Absolutely. Well, kunkelforcongress.com is our website. If you're able to donate, that would be greatly appreciated here in the last few days. And if you want a phone bank with us, we're trying to make 100,000 phone calls and texts to voters here in the district by election day. So that is a big goal.
Very impressive. Very impressive. Well, I wish you a tremendous amount of luck. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you the one question I ask everybody before I let them go, is what their most unique, interesting, or memorable experience was that they ever had in the ladies' room, aside from this interview.
Right. I wish I had had more time to think on that question.
Oh, I never give that question out in advance.
The only thing that comes to mind is in China. I lived in China for a year, and they have squat toilets in China, which are, not what I was used to, not what we're used to in the United States. And I just remember being soaking wet on vacation in China and like running into the ladies' room to try to change, and then realizing that the walls of the stalls were only like 2.5 feet high because they were squat toilets.
What about the first time you ever experienced a squat toilet facility in China, which is basically in some places just a hole in the floor? We've had many of our guests talk about that.
Yeah, it was, I made it. It worked. It was definitely not what I was expecting. It was a little bit like camping, you're just like, okay, I guess.
Well, we wish you a tremendous amount of luck. We're rooting for you. We're cheering for you. And we know that if given the opportunity, you will accomplish great things, not just for West Virginia, but of course for the environment and for healthcare for all.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be with you today. And yeah, just a couple of weeks left, so we can do it.
Just a couple of weeks. Good luck. Take care. Keep us posted.
You. Will do. Take care. Bye.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook @Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.